Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chuchu's Ranker. On this episode, we're going to be discussing the discography of The Cure. So The Cure formed in 1978 in Crawley, West Sussex in the UK, and was the brainchild of singer, songwriter and guitarist Robert Smith, who has been the only permanent member of the band throughout its existence. Other players in the band have been in and out of a revolving door, with only Simon Gallup on bass coming close to Smith's ubiquity within the band. Originally, the band came up in the post-Sex Pistols boom, literally post-punk, before that genre really got its definition, but their earlier output was much more new wave orientated. But after touring with Susie and the Banshees, who Smith would later briefly join, the band became inspired and turned in a more gothic direction, helping to define the term post-punk. And of course, by that I mean The Cure became the most recognizable post-punk band in the world, its ultimate untouchable icons. But The Cure are much more than just goth rockers, as their discography is impressively varied, and the way that the band is able to flip between darkness and catchy jangle pop at the drop of a hat is pretty damn impressive. And as for my own fandom, I love The Cure, of course I do. They are easily one of the best and most iconic alternative rock bands of the 1980s, true legends. That said, I'm also not of the opinion that The Cure have never put a foot wrong. They do have some records that I just don't like very much. So if you're a true die-hard fan who thinks that they have nothing but 5-star albums, fair warning, buckle up because the early entries on this list might be a bit of a rough ride. So The Cure have 13 studio albums, and that's all we're going to be ranking, so no Japanese Whispers or any other compilations. And yeah, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are The Cure's studio albums ranked from worst to best. So, coming in last place, dead last, we have Bloodflowers from the year of 2000, which was the band's 11th LP, and this one is designed to be the concluding chapter of a gothic trilogy of records, with the other two being 1982's Pornography and 1989's Disintegration, which is both odd and ill-advised in my opinion. Odd because I thought the gothic trilogy already existed, with 17 Seconds, Faith and Pornography, and ill-advised because it's just opening itself up to comparisons with vastly superior records. And yeah, I won't beat around the bush on this one, I don't like this album much at all. I think it's incredibly tedious, overlong, slow-paced, blandly produced, and way too enamored with self-replication. It's like, hey kids, do you remember that album Disintegration from the late 80s? You do? Well, come listen to Bloodflowers, the bargain bin discount sequel to it. You like Pictures of You, right? Well, here we have Out of This World and Last Day of Summer, which sound exactly the same as it, and thusly also exactly the same as each other. And how about Close Down? Here we have a less good version of that too, called Where the Birds Always Sing. And who could forget Plain Song? Here we have the song The Loudest Sound, which is at least 10% as memorable as that one, while sounding nearly identical. And so it goes. Watching Me Fall is basically Fascination Street. The closer, Bloodflowers, apes Same Deep Water as You. And yeah, I know there is a contingent of Cure fans that herald this one as one of their classics, and if you love this, more power to you. I wish I liked this as much as you do. But for me, this is just a way less good version of Disintegration. And why would I listen to that when I could just actually go listen to Disintegration? But I don't want to make fans of Bloodflowers cry too hard, so I will say that despite its proximity to Pictures of You, Out of This World is gorgeous, and I love those subtle twinkling pianos that hide just underneath the surface. But still, this is an easy last place as far as I'm concerned. Next up, we have the band's 10th LP, Wild Mood Swings from 1996. And Wild Mood Swings is like the perfect title for this record, as it's all over the bloody place. And the first thing to note about this record is the general tone, which is bright and colourful, fitting in with the contemporary Britpop trend of the mid-90s, which is something I like. Unfortunately, this album suffers from a general lack of quality songwriting. Some tracks on this are great, but the good material is far outweighed by the bad. I mean, making a naff piece of bluster and then trying to pep it up by adding trumpets, not the best look in the world. Return, I'm looking at you by the way. But as I say, there is good stuff on here, so we'll start with that. This Is a Lie is a gorgeous Baroque ballad with its interesting faux orchestration. Mint Car and Round and Round and Round are great slices of summery jangle pop, and Gone is a bit of jazzy insanity with some fun vocal growls from Smith. The 13th is also a lot of fun with its Caribbean beach vibes, but my favourite off of this is Treasure, which is just a really soulful ballad. Love that track, and it's one that keeps me coming back. Sadly though, then the rot begins. Club America is overcluttered and overlong, Numb is a boring dirge, Trap is utterly unmemorable, and tracks like Strange Attraction and Jupiter Crash are just throwaway fluff at best. So yeah, at over an hour in length, Wild Mood Swings is too inconsistent to really recommend, but if you haven't heard this one, you should at least cherry pick the best tracks off of it, because they're great. Next up, we have the band's self-titled LP from 2004, which was their 12th album, and there seems to be a bit of confusion surrounding the track listing on this record. There are many different versions, with some featuring certain songs and others not, and just to clarify, I'm reviewing the 12-track version that runs 54 minutes, and thank God I'm not reviewing a longer version, because if this record has a serious fault, and it kinda does, is that it's too long, and the relentless distortion of its guitar tone really starts to get too much by the end. This is an album that's just really crying out for a bit of tonal variety, but sadly, never gets it. That said, this album's songwriting is far more energized and consistent than the previous two records on this list, which are also the records that came directly before it. And this is almost without doubt the band's most overtly rocking and heavy album. It's pretty badass, but as I said, just kinda goes too long in the same mode. If the band could have trimmed 15 minutes off its runtime, this could have been an all-timer, but as it is, it's merely, good. And yeah, I do like this record, by the way, so breathe easy, Cure fans, the worst is over, even though this isn't quite perfect. So yeah, the record kicks off really strong with Lost and Labyrinth, a pair of really cool, dark-hued openers. Before 3 and The End of the World are more pop-orientated, the former is really catchy, and the latter has an epic obfuscating structure. I Don't Know What's Going On is super catchy and a late album highlight, but my favourite off of this though is the 10-minute slice of Wah Wah Heaven that is Promise. And yeah, I know I complained about overlength, but that track is just great and totally earns its runtime. That said, some other tracks like Old End, Taking Off, or Never definitely fall on the filler side of the fence for me, and the filler on this is worsened by that relentless distorted guitar tone. However, this does run counter to the previous entry of Wild Mood Swings, because ultimately, the good on this outweighs the bad, and here we have the pendulum swinging from mediocre to at least decent. Next up, we have the band's most recent album, 413 Dream, from 2008, and this is a no bells and whistles linear progression onwards from their previous album, which is also the previous entry on this list, but the band do manage to correct the faults of this self-titled here though. This album has much more in the way of tonal variety, it's slightly shorter, and has slightly better songwriting, at least in my opinion. Originally, the record was going to be a double album, and over 30 songs were recorded during the sessions. Mercifully, Robert Smith came to his senses and spared us that kind of torturous hell, instead cherry-picking the best tracks and delivering an unambitious yet consistent single disc. And yet there are plenty of highlights here. Opener Underneath the Stars is a beautiful atmospheric ballad, The Only One is a lovely bit of tuneful jangle pop with some subtle piano work that always catches my ears, Siren Song adds some welcome tonal variety with its laid-back nature and slide guitars, and Sleep When I'm Dead is a kick-ass funky jam. In fact, the only thing to really complain about on this record is its meat and potatoes approach to things. Whilst a consistent ride with some great tunes taken in along the way, I feel that this is the Cure record with the least sense of identity. If the songs on this weren't as strong as they are, this might have been a complete train wreck. As it is, for me, this is something of a late career highlight. But to be fair, I can also see how other fans might not be quite as kind to this one and might rank it way lower. But yeah, I personally kinda like it. It's 3 stars. It's okay by me. Coming in next, we have 17 Seconds, which was the band's sophomore album from 1980. And this is where the Cure start their journey down the gothic path. As I noted in the intro, the inspiration came from touring with goth pioneers Susie and the Banshees. And I guess Robert Smith saw a fellow soulmate in Susie, as he not only started to follow in her footsteps, but also stole her look with the lipstick and the big hair. And who can blame him, as Susie and the Banshees absolutely rule. Unfortunately, this album doesn't quite rule. This is the sound of a band taking very cautious steps into a new genre. Very important steps for sure, but they're still lacking the necessary confidence, consistency and ideas to make a truly compelling record here. The production is incredibly basic and it leads to a sparsely cohesive and clinical sound, but not an entirely entertaining one. A lot of these tracks feel like demos or half-baked sketches. I mean, take the instrumentals 3 and Final Sound. Cool mini ideas, but ultimately they add up to nothing. Also, tracks like Play for Today and In Your House are too basic to really get your teeth into. That said, when the album does find its feet, it gives glimpses of the quality to come. Secrets has some interesting piano that elevates it out of the album's sparse mire, while At Night has some fat bass and rudimentary synths that I enjoy. And of course, album highlight of Forest is a banger and the band's first great goth rock tune. So yeah, although this isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, it is nevertheless a really important step forward for the band, and also has some kind of retro X-element charm to it that definitely puts it above the previous entries on this list. Coming in next, we have Three Imaginary Boys, which was the band's debut album from 1979, so this predates the band's move into Gothica and has a vastly different soundscape than any other Cure record. It's simple, punky, catchy, fast-paced and tons of fun, and to be honest, I would have loved one more early record of this style because the band definitely had something special going on here. It's bright and twee, and tracks like the boisterous Accuracy, Grinding Halt with its daft ending, and the insanely catchy album highlight Fire in Cairo are just great. Whilst tracks like the opening 10:15 Saturday Night and the title track 3 Imaginary Boys hint at the band's future direction, both featuring cool guitar solos. But you know, I won't pretend this record is perfect because it's not. It definitely has some high profile fillers on it. I mean, the cover of Jimi Hendrix's Foxy Lady is so fucking bad. It's horrendous. Likewise, Meat Hook and the closer Weedy Burton are also faintly embarrassing inclusions, so they definitely stall this album's progress up the list. Which is a shame, as the American version of the debut, Boys Don't Cry, rectifies all those faults, replacing the Duff tracks with killer singles like the titular Boys Don't Cry and the band's debut single Killing an Arab. Mercifully, that's the version that I somehow ended up growing up with, and if I was ranking Boys Don't Cry, it would definitely be further up the list. But still, Three Imaginary Boys equates to a flawed but really fun debut album. Next up, we have the band's third album, Faith, from 1981, and this moves the band on nicely from their previous record, 17 Seconds, implementing much more in the way of atmospheric texturing, more fleshed out ideas and sonic variety. And it's an album that has an ethereal, ghostly quality to it that totally matches its forlorn artwork. This is definitely one of The Cure's most mournful records. That said, a lot of these songs are about furthering the overall atmosphere. Thus, they just kind of melt into the texture of the album. This isn't really a good example of a record to pull individual highlights from. This is much more about the overall than the individual pieces, a true case of the whole being more than the sum of its parts. But still, a lot of the parts are still pretty great by themselves. The Holy Hour sounds immediately more confident than anything on 17 Seconds. Primary has a thumping energy to it. All Cats Are Grey is one of my favourite Cure tracks with its dour keyboard moans and some awesome lyrics about shipwrecks and mortality. Whilst Drowning Man and Faith end the record with some amazing atmospherics, especially Faith, which just pulls you in with Smith's earwormy vocals. So yeah, this is a pretty damn good atmospheric post-punk record, and at this point on the list we are definitely turning the corner, and there's nothing but genuinely great records from this entry onwards. So yeah, let's forge on ahead. Next up, we have The Top from 1984, which was the band's fifth album. So after the intensely dark pornography, Robert Smith became disillusioned with the idea of The Cure and basically dissolved the band and moved on to other projects. Namely, making a psychedelic record as part of The Glove and joining Susie and the Banshees for the recording of their Hyena album as their guitarist. But soon, the itch to be a front and centre star returned, and Smith left Susie and the Banshees in acrimonious fashion to reform a more pop-orientated version of The Cure. The The preceding year's singles and EPs were compiled into a release titled Japanese Whispers, which showed the band flexing some synth-pop and jazz-orientated muscles, with tracks like Let's Go to Bed and The Love Cat sounding unlike anything the band had ever made before. And The Top continues in the same vein and is very much a transitional record between the darkness of pornography and the pop-orientated direction of the next LPs. And this is an album that gets a lot of short shrift from Cure fans, but I just don't get why this gets so much crap, whilst A Head on the Door gets so much love, because they're just extensions of the same thing in my opinion. I would even go as far as to say that The Top is more consistent than its more popular successor. And yeah, I really love this one, and I like pretty much every track on it. Tracks like Shake Dog Shake and Give It To Me are punky and still maintain a bit of pornography's dark chaos in the DNA. Bird Mad Girl and The Caterpillar are odd yet super catchy slices of jangle pop. I also really love Wailing Wall with its discordant guitars and eastern riffs, and Piggy in the Mirror is really weird and catchy, and I love its Arabian flavoured guitar break. Even Dressing Up, a track that gets tons of hate from the fans, is still a track I like due to its undercurrent of sadness that runs through the melody. So yeah, this is a really underrated record within The Cure's discography, and if it wasn't for a couple of truly dazzling high spots on The Head on the Door, I might have even ranked this higher. Speaking of which, next up we have A Head on the Door, which was the band's 6th LP from 1985, and yeah, I know, this is without question the most controversial placing on this list, because to not have A Head on the Door in your top 3 Cure records is basically sacrilege. Well, I'm one sacrilegious motherfucker in that case, but before anybody rage quits, consider that this is still in my top 5 Cure records, and I love it. I mean, I don't think it's perfect, but I still do love it. And this record sees a natural progression onwards from The Top into more mainstream alternative rock dynamics. It's a little lighter and a little bit more accessible than its predecessor, but as I mentioned during the last entry, not quite as consistent, at least in my opinion. Whilst I liked almost every song on The Top, there are a couple on this that just don't do much for me. Both 6 Different Ways and The Baby Screams really feel underbaked, especially The Baby Screams, which kind of feels like the band forgot to record the overdubs or something. It's just too basic and I don't really get much out of it. But my biggest Cure-based sin probably has to be the fact that I just don't like Close to You very much. And yeah, I know it's one of the band's standards, but the whispered vocals don't do anything for me. On the later Lullaby, the whispered vocals make sense within the context of the narrative and add something to the song, but on Close to You, they don't add anything, they just diminish the catchiness and slightly annoy me. That said, the rest of the album absolutely bangs. In Between Days is a straight up classic slice of 1980s jangle pop. Blood is absolutely amazing with its awesome Arabian riffs. A Night Like This is great with its building structure and delightfully cheesy 80s saxophone solo. Screw has an interesting Prince-esque funk vibe to it, and Sinking is a good atmospheric closer that ties itself to the band's older, darker works. My favourite off of this though, and also one of my favourite Cure tracks ever, is Push, which is rocking and cathartic in all the right ways. A track that always lifts you up and blasts you into the stratosphere. It is a piece of alternative rock perfection. So yeah, ultimately, this isn't the most consistent Cure record for me, but its high spots are a force to be reckoned with, so here it lands on my list at number 5. Next up we have Wish from 1992, which was the band's 9th album and follow-up to their most successful record Disintegration. And Wish is kind of like the fulcrum point for The Cure, where all parts of their career intersect. And it's a joyous combination of their gothic parts, pop parts, and occasional indicators of their future directions. And talking about future directions, a tip of the cap must go out to The Cure for totally predicting Britpop on this album. Open basically introduces Oasis's whole shtick with laddish lyrics about getting beers in over buzzing raucous distortion, whilst jangle pop masterpieces like High and the phenomenally catchy Friday I'm in Love hands out templates to everybody from Blur to Shed 7 and beyond. Other highlights on the stacked LP include Apart and Trust, which are just amazingly beautiful ballads. I absolutely love both those songs, with Trust in particular meaning something special to me on a personal level. Letter to Elise is an anthemically catchy electroacoustic track that again feels like it's preempting Britpop, whilst Wendy Time and Doing the Unstuck feel like nice tonal change-ups in a light and fluffy kind of way. My favourite off of this though probably has to be From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea, which is just badass with its lacerating guitar riffs and building gothic atmosphere. That track is cool as fuck. But it also has to be noted that this is an album that doesn't entirely stick its landing. At over an hour long, it's a bit too long, especially as the last 3 tracks definitely take a step down in quality. I mean, Cut points towards late career blustery malaise, whilst To Wish Impossible Things is one ballad too many, trying to hang with Apart and Trust, yet it's just not as good. And End? Well, actually, I'll give that one a pass, because at least that ties in thematically with Open, even though a better melody wouldn't have gone amiss. But these small blemishes don't dent the whole. So yeah, Wish is just a great record that gives a relatively concise overview of what The Cure is all about. Highly recommended. Next up we have Kiss Me Kiss Me Kiss Me, which was the band's 7th LP from 1987, and this is a double album that runs 18 tracks at 1 hour and 14 minutes. Usually I would say that's too long, but I feel this album really managed to pull that off in pretty spectacular fashion. And from a stylistic approach, this sees The Cure melding darker, discordant soundscapes with the jangle pop of their previous 2 albums, and is notable for having a significantly more distorted guitar tone than ever before. And this is a bit of a weird one for me, because this record has none of my favourite Cure songs on it, and very little in the way of highlights that really stand out, but what it does have is a level of consistency. None of the tracks are excellent, but all of them are very good. The pacing, the variety and the sequencing is also done really well on this record, and the LP never seems to drag during its lengthy runtime. Usually, double albums suffer from a whole bunch of filler, but I think almost everything on this works. Even the nebulous style tracks like Snake Pit, Hey You, Like Cockatoos or Icing Sugar work as atmosphere builders, or breaks to catch your breath, or necessary pacing change-ups. They always have a point to be there. In fact, the only track I would actually consider to be filler would be The Perfect Girl, which is somewhat of an unbaked pop tune. But everything else on this is good. As I said, none of my favourite tracks are on this, but songs I really enjoy are Catch with its light Spanish sounding jangle, If Only We Could Sleep Tonight for its delectable Eastern riffs, Why Can't I Be You for its pleasingly dated synth stabs, Hot 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 for its unique brand of rock funk, and 1,000 Hours for bringing a bit of sweeping balladry to the back end. So yeah, despite its lack of peak material, this is an album I always enjoy and never seem to get tired of. Excellent stuff. Coming in next, we have 1982's Pornography, which was the band's 4th album, and here we find the band at their darkest and most intense. Whilst making this record, the band were falling apart, and Smith was into heavy drug use and suffering from depression, all of which seeped into the soundscapes and lyrics, and makes this one of the darkest records of the 1980s. And yeah, I fucking love this record, and it smashes the 5-star button pretty damn hard. Every track on this is great, each one serving the overall atmosphere, yet also being its own standalone highlight. The opening track, 100 Years, kicks things off with pitch black darkness and immediately impressive screaming guitars, and I absolutely love that lyric. I open my mouth, and my head bursts open, a sound like a tiger thrashing in the water. Man, that is just such a badass line. A short-term effect is unnerving with its feedback-laden guitars and off-kilter nature. Lead single, The Hanging Garden, seems to take a leaf from Echo and the Bunnymen's Heaven Up Here and impresses with its jumbled drum rhythms, whilst Siamese Twins and The Figurehead deepen the darkness of the record. Siamese Twins with its dirgy pace and The Figurehead with its churning drums and awesome building soundscape. My favourite off of this though is the more straightforward rocker A Strange Day, with its memorable chiming riff that comes in during the chorus, and that moment in the middle A where the guitars start to ascend is just a real goosebump moment for me. It feels like a ray of sunshine crashing through black clouds on a stormy day. And the last 2 tracks don't drop in quality either. Cold has one of the most evil sounding intros of all time, with its clinical drums, humming bass and baroque orchestration. It sounds like something a vampire would have as their wrestling entrance theme, whilst the title track closes the record with a suitably desperate sounding howl of intensity. So yeah, this is a masterpiece of post-punk and an absolute essential listening experience for anyone with even a passing interest in gothic music. It is awesome. So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the Cure Gold Medal is going to go to the band's 8th album, Disintegration, from 1989. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I have to say that it wasn't an easy choice between Pornography and Disintegration for me. In fact, I'd say that Pornography was the more consistent of the two records, but ultimately Disintegration wins the day because its peaks are just so damn high. I mean, this album contains some of the greatest alternative rock songs of all time. And this record is an obvious 5 stars for me, but it does have an occasional fault to point out before we kick in with the inevitable love parade. The album is 12 tracks at 1 hour and 12 minutes, which is just too damn long. This album definitely suffers from the law that bands faced back in the early days of the CD format of just trying to fill the entire disc with music. I mean, the last 3 tracks on this are not really necessary. I mean, they're not bad either. Disintegration has some nice energy and interesting lyrics, and Homesick and Untitled have a dour, come down kind of vibe to them, but they do push the record into tangible overlength. If this record had ended on track 9 with the epic building soundscape of Same Deep Water Review with its oddly earwormy guitar parts, there would have been zero confusion as to which Cure album was the best. I mean, it would have been like, yes sir, Disintegration sir. But, ultimately I guess we all have to deal with the fact that this record does go on for just a bit too long. And as for a general style, Disintegration is more often than not a collection of slow-paced funeral dirges, spiced up here and there with unforgettable pop songs or an occasional blast of searing rock. It's a fantastic mix of elements that adds up to a brilliant, unforgettable gothic masterpiece. Plainsong kicks off the album in gobsmacking style, with its really sad yet cathartic soundscape. It feels like walking through a destroyed city before coming to a gaping abyss and just staring down into the darkness. It absolutely rules. Pictures of You is about as heartbreaking a ballad as one could possibly write. I mean, that moment where Smith sings, "If only I'd thought of the right words, I could have held on to your heart. If only I'd thought of the right words, I wouldn't be breaking apart all my pictures of you." I mean, it just hits like a punch to the goddamn kidneys. And the way the guitar lifts off near the end of the song, yes please, straight into the vein, sir. And Close Down is yet another really cathartic track that has a personal meaning to me, and it caps off one of the greatest opening trios in music history. Of course, you also have the more pop-orientated tunes on here too, with Love Song adding a great change up in tone and being catchy as all hell, whilst Lullaby is really theatrical with its whispered vocals and nightmarish themes. And then you have the glowering rock pig that is Fascination Street, which steals the main guitar figure from Pink Floyd's Shine On You Crazy Diamond and melds it with the dancey rock swagger of How Soon Is Now by the Smiths. It is just incredible and a real album highlight. Add into that the atmosphere building of Last Dance and Prayers for Rain, and you have a rock solid all-time classic that is beyond the realms of essential listening. And that's it, that's my Cure list. But that won't be your list, so please sound off in the comment section and tell me how you'd rank these records. Like, share, subscribe, and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.
To my